This Parsha podcast is dedicated by my dear friend Gilad Levy from Toronto in the merit of a complete refuah shalema for Yonatan ben Marla. May he merit a complete and total recovery from his medical situation with no lingering effects. It's the 4th week of the Parsha podcast live, and I'm always trying to figure out how to allocate my time best. Thank God I'm working on all sorts of different projects and have to choose what to work on when. And now I have it simplified for me. Tuesday nights in the Torch Center, in the new Torch Center in Houston, Texas. That's when I'm recording the Parsha podcast. It used to be I would have to plan. Should I do it on Monday? Maybe we'll do it early on Sunday, or wait to the very last moment, Wednesday night. But this simplifies it for me. And I appreciate y'all for joining this experiment that we're committing to do to the end of Genesis. Thank God we also restarted the newsletter. I had a newsletter. It was great. And then I stopped doing it. And then once you get out of the habit of doing it, it's hard to get back into it. But the reception has been actually pretty great, even better than expected, because these emails, if you've seen them, you know, they're quite long. They're not emails. They're treatises. And I imagine some of the readers of my weekly newsletter, some of them imagine that it's just me being unnecessarily, intentionally long. Some readers probably expect that I'm deliberately trying to lengthen them, but the opposite is true. This past week, I sent an email about Eliezer, and I looked it up. It was almost 2,700 words. But I'll tell you that I spent all of Friday morning shortening, cutting, and I edited out more than 500 words before sending it off to your email box. And I think people like it. And to me, the metric that tells me that people are enjoying it is that this past week, I sent this email to almost 1,500 recipients. And a huge number of people are opening the email. And this week, I was shocked that there wasn't even a single unsubscribe out of more than 1,000, basically 1,500 people. Get this to the email box, email inbox. There wasn't even one person that said, you know what, this is too much. Let me unsubscribe. And the truth is, I actually prefer like an unsubscribe or two. Because then I could tell myself, listen, it's not so popular. This person and that person, they don't want it. They clicked on subscribe. And then I could drop the project more easily. I have an out. I have some way to slip out of this. I tell myself, it's not popular. People aren't enjoying it. It must be low quality. But alas, people are enjoying the newsletter and no one's unsubscribing. So please, if you get it this week and you don't like it, just unsubscribe. So that way I have some plausible deniability, some excuse to tell y'all, you know what? I got some unsubscribes and maybe we'll opt out of it. But I hope to continue if it is still popular to write one each week. No promises. But now it's time, of course, for the Parsha podcast. It's year 9 of the Parsha podcast. Who would have believed it? It's year 9 of the Parsha podcast. And we're focusing on the theme that the Torah is our ID. It's our identification. And every week we're going to have an I, which is an idea, a D, a dilemma. And this week, all the ideas are all wrapped up in all the dilemmas of our Parsha. It's Parsha's Toldos. And we meet the Toldos, the descendants of Isaac and Rebekah. It's only 2. They're twins, and they cannot possibly be any more different. Isaac and Rebekah, as is the pattern with the forefathers, they are barren, they are infertile, and they pray, and the Almighty accedes to their prayer. Rebekah becomes pregnant. And it's quite an eventful pregnancy. The verse tells us that the children were warring within her, were jostling within her. And it was so unpleasant that she said she was exasperated and said, why am I doing this? It's so unpleasant. And Rashi tells us that whenever she would pass the academy and there was an atmosphere of Torah study, then Jacob, one of the babies, one of the fetuses, one of the embryos, one of the zygotes, would make a move, would begin to jostle to be born. He was interested in studying. He wanted to join. He started kicking to make his way out. And when Rebekah passed the house of idolatry, she felt another stirring. This time it was Esau. He is making a move to try to leave. That's one interpretation as to what she experienced, Rashi tells us. A second interpretation is that Jacob and Esau were at odds with each other, were waging an intrauterine battle, fighting and jostling and sparring over the two worlds. What Rashi is telling us is that there's two babies here, two fetuses that are completely at odds with each other, and there's no room for compatibility or reconciliation at all. And even in utero, they are going at it. She goes to the prophet, help me, show me what I should do. What am I supposed to think about what's happening? And the prophet tells her, there's not one baby, there are two babies. And each one of these babies will spawn a nation. A people will emerge from each one of your babies. And they will be very different. They will be divergent. From your womb, they will head in different directions. This one to become righteous. This one to become wicked. And these nations that they will spawn will be always fighting with each other. And one will always be on top and the other will always be on the bottom. Meaning there's never going to be parity between these two. If one's up, the other is down, and vice versa. And ultimately, the older one will be submitted to the younger one. She hears this prophecy. She is now guided by God and the prophet as to what is the destiny of this pregnancy. And she has twins. And the first one, the older one, the one destined to be submitted to the younger one, well, that's Esau. He's all ruddy. He's red and aggressive looking, very hairy. Rashi tells us this is symbolic of the fact that he's going to be a bloodshedder. And then the brother comes out, and that's Jacob, and he's grabbing onto the heel of Esau. And that's also symbolic that these two warring nations, these two nations that are at odds with each other, Esau will have the head start. The ruddy, hairy one will be in the lead, but ultimately Jacob will triumph as the prophet foretold. And indeed, the children, they grow up, and Esau goes his direction. He becomes a hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob, he's wholesome, and he sits and dwells in the tents. And this section, the introduction of the two main characters of our Parsha, it ends, Vaye'ehav Yitzchak, and Isaac, he loved Esau. He was seduced, Rashi tells us, by Esau. Esau misled him to make him think that he was more righteous than he actually was. So Isaac, he favors Esau. Rivka, and Rebekah, she loves Jacob. This whole Parsha, this whole story is truly a mystery. It's an enigma. It's a riddle, and there are all sorts of dilemmas featured in the Parsha. We have two boys. They're different in every possible way. We have two worlds that are different in every possible way. And these two boys, these representatives of these two ideologies, they're polar opposites. And when one rises, the other must fall, and vice versa. Yet they're twins, same parents, with very divergent results. We've had different siblings before. We just had previously Abraham has Ishmael, and he has Isaac, and Isaac is the heir and the continuity of Abraham, and Ishmael's trouble. We got to send him away. We got to banish him. But Isaac and Ishmael, that's different mothers, right? Hagar and Sarah. And here we have identical parents, and it's the same gestation. You can't say that, well, Rebecca was smoking, or she was drinking when Esau was in utero. This is the exact same pregnancy. Arsacius tells us that they were actually identical twins, meaning it was from one embryo that split. And they're such opposites. And from the very beginning, Esau is destined to be a bloodshedder. And Jacob is wholesome. He's righteous. He's sitting, he's dwelling in the tents. These twins are irreconcilably at odds. Now we know the end of the story. The prophet, even ahead of time, tells us that the ultimate winner is the younger one, is Jacob. But Isaac seems to be departing from that. He's the enigma. He loves Esau. He's misled. He's seduced by Esau. And he wants, as we shall see later in the story, where some of the real dilemmas of the Parsha surface, he has a blessing, one prophetic blessing that he's going to give to one of his sons, and he wants to bless Esau. And Rashi tells us, and if you read the story, it's obvious, this blessing is highly coveted. Arsacius tells us it's a prophetic blessing, meaning once the blessing is conveyed, it will definitely be fulfilled. You know, for you to get a blessing from your friend, from your cousin, from your neighbor, it's a nice thing, and we don't belittle even the blessing of a simpleton, but this is a totally different class of a blessing. And Rebecca knows via prophecy, the younger one will triumph. The younger one, Jacob's, will be the true heir of Abraham and Isaac. She knows that prophetically. She loves Jacob as a result. She takes very aggressive steps to ensure that Jacob ends up with that coveted blessing. But she never tells her husband about the prophecy. And in fact, it's a pattern. Last year I did the calculation. By my calculation, there are 4 prophecies that Rebecca receives in our Parsha. Some of them, it's explicit in the scripture. Others, the commentators pointed out. She has 4 prophecies, and she doesn't convey any of them to her husband. Maybe they need to work on some communication, don't you think? Do we need a counselor? A therapist? What's going on over here? Rebecca is a prophetess, obviously, as is Isaac. But Rebecca has all these little bits of information that mold her perspective, and she doesn't pass it on to Isaac. So the first one for us we saw, she goes to the prophet, and he tells her 2 nations, then they're going to go in different directions from your womb, and they'll always be at odds when one's up, the other's down. V'rav ya'avod sa'ir. And the older one will be subjected to the younger one. Rebecca receives the prophecy, doesn't tell it to Isaac. When Isaac sends Esau to go catch some game to facilitate this prophetic blessing, just parenthetically, the reason why he needs the game, he needs the steak, is because it is a prophetic blessing. The body must be on board. If the body is dragging down the soul cannot soar to achieve the levels of prophecy needed for such a blessing. And therefore, Isaac linked this prophecy with the steak to make sure that the body is on board. It's bribed to join this ascent. He tells us to Esau, go catch some game. I'm giving you a blessing. I'm 123 years old. I may die. I'm a little blind or partially blind. I am blind. His eyes were heavy, we're told. Go catch some game. I'm going to give you a blessing before I die. Chapter 27, verse 5. Rebecca hears that. How'd she hear it? Commentaries tell us. Isaac was whispering it because he wanted to make sure that this blessing goes to Esau. No one should hear. No one should tamper with his plans. Isaac is whispering and Rebecca is hearing, commentaries tell us, because she's a prophetess. She heard it, even though it wasn't intended for her to hear. a prophecy that Rebekah has, Isaac is not part of that. When she proposes her plan to Jacob, you impersonate Esau, tell your dad I'm Esau, you get the blessings that he wants to give to Esau. Jacob, of course, is resistant. If I portray myself as Esau, and daddy finds out, and Isaac finds out, he's going to curse me. So chapter 27, verse 13, Rebekah tells Jacob, Alai kilalascha beni. I will accept, I will absorb this curse. And the commentaries tell us, the Targum tells us, what she was saying is that I know prophetically that you will not be cursed. This plan, this outrageous cockamamie plan will work. You'll get the blessings. Prophecy that Rebekah has and Isaac is oblivious to. And finally, after the heist, Esau commits in his mind, he tells in his heart, I'm going to kill Jacob for what he did to me. The verse tells us, 27:42, V'yugad leRivka was told to Rivka. Rashi tells us when he was told what Esau was thinking in his heart, it was told prophetically. So Rebekah is privy to all this behind-the-scenes information and divulges nothing to her husband. To say or not to say, that's the dilemma, and Rebekah stays mute. If God wants this information to find its way to Isaac, Isaac is a prophet on his own right. He should tell him directly. All of her revelations she keeps to herself. Now there's a big disagreement here. Isaac loves, he favors Esau. Jacob is loved, is favored by Rebekah. And there's a disagreement which of these twins should be the recipient of this blessing. And Isaac summons his firstborn Esau, make me a feast, catch me some game, sharpen your sword. I'm going to give you a blessing before I die. Rebekah is prophetically informed about this, and she orchestrates the greatest heist of all time. While Esau is out hunting for game for his father, she has Jacob masquerade as Esau. Isaac is blind. We'll dupe him. But what's going to be? He's going to feel me and find out that I'm actually not the hairy Esau. And he's going to curse me and say, don't worry about it. I'll absorb it. She gets him dressed in some furry clothing, some of Esau's clothing. And he presents himself to Isaac. Here I am. I'm Esau, your firstborn. Jacob and Rebekah are conspiring to deceive Isaac, and to do it just in time before Esau gets back. And indeed, Jacob enters, and he speaks so respectfully to his father that his father seems something's amiss. He's suspicious. Are you really Esau? Or maybe something is amiss. And he investigates, and he starts to feel all over him. And he declares, Hakol Kol Yaakov, the voice sounds like Jacob. But the hands, the hairy hands, they're the hands of Esau. Notwithstanding his suspicion and his apparent uncertainty as to the identity of which of his sons is present before him, he blesses Jacob with the blessings intended for Esau. It's only 2 verses, but it's some of the most consequential things that have happened to our nation. Chapter 27, verses 28 and 29. May God give you mital hashamayim, the dew of the heaven and the fats of the earth, virov dagan v'sirosh, lots and lots of bounty, lots of crops, lots of wealth, lots of wine, lots of riches. Nations will serve you. Peoples will bow before you. You will be a master over your brother. And all of your mother's sons other nations will bow down before you. Ararecha aru, those who curse you are cursed, and those who bless you are blessed. Ever since that moment, thousands of years ago, our people, the descendants of Jacob, have been the bearers of this tremendous blessing. The blessing commandeered from Esau. The blessings usurped from Esau. Now Esau, he follows right when Jacob leaves. Esau enters. And he is devastated to discover that his blessings that he had coveted so dearly were pilfered. And he has to beg for scraps. And he determines, I'm going to get my revenge. I'm going to kill Jacob for this unconscionable crime. If you think about this, the story it's really outrageous, and there's really another dilemma here. Jacob, he's part of this deception. And he's known to us as Emes LeYaakov, truthful Jacob. He's the paragon of truth. Yet he does something which is so deceptive. He impersonates Esau. He pretends to be someone he's not. And he steals the blessing. And of course, he's compelled to do so by his mother. And she was compelled to do so by the prophecy. But it's still kind of noteworthy to mention that Jacob is violating his fundamental attribute. Is this the way to get a blessing? If you think about it, everyone here is making decisions that we ought to question. Rebecca is deciding to hide her prophecies. Isaac is deciding to favor Esau. Esau is supposed to get the blessings, Isaac determines. Rebecca decides to switch in, conveniently, Jacob. And Jacob accedes to this outrageous plan. Each one of the components of this story raises questions for us. Now, yes, the story has a happy ending. Jacob got the blessing. And of course, next year's Parsha has to leave, has to flee because Esau wants to kill him. Even after spending 20 years with Laban, he has to come back. And Esau, it's been 34 years since the heist. He is still hell-bent on revenge. But it works out. He gets the blessings. He navigates 20 years with Laban. He gets back, and he has to navigate that tricky situation. But it makes us wonder, couldn't this have been so much neater and more simple? Why did it have to happen this way? Yes, this story is important to us because it's documenting a critical element of the founding of our people. This blessing is indispensable to us, to our nation, to our history as a people. But it arrives to us, to our antecedent, to Jacob, in the most convoluted and circuitous of ways. Isaac wants to bless Esau for some reason. Jacob has to masquerade as Esau and to steal the blessings. And again, the whole story rubs us the wrong way. Isaac is under the impression that Esau is deserving of the blessings. Why would he be under that impression? Rebecca schemes and plots and orchestrates this heist of all heists. And we can't really blame Jacob. He was compelled to do so by his mother. We can't blame her. She had a prophecy that she was obligated to try to actualize. If you think about it, there's no way for us to come to any other conclusion other than this is the way it had to be. The Almighty orchestrated this story because this is the way Jacob had to get this blessing. It had to be via this deceptive manner. So he denies information from Isaac. Isaac wants to give the blessing to Esau. He thinks he's giving the blessing to Esau. That's the way Jacob had to receive the blessings. And the question is, why? Why did the Almighty design this whole story so that Jacob does indeed receive the blessings, but in the most troublesome and convoluted and indirect and circuitous of ways. The whole Parsha, we can say, it's a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. Now, I have to say, I get the question of like, what's Jacob doing and stealing? It seems so wrong. I get the question a lot. A lot of people are bothered by this story because it's a troublesome story. And the nice thing to know is that our sages spoke about this at length. And every part of this story is studied and analyzed and explicated by the giants of our history. I want to share with you tonight, really, some of the powerful, helpful, instructive, and even surprising perspectives that our sages offer. Now, every year I like to cite the idea that my grandfather used to always say every year. You got to remember this. People read the story, they think, Isaac, he's not that bright. How can anyone think that Esau is better than Jacob? What was he thinking? Is he naive? Is he slow? Was he just so easily misled? He really thought that Esau, we know him, he's a murderer. He's a very superficial person. Give me the red stuff. Let me give up everything for that. His wives are sinful. His whole storyline, as we shall read next week. Correction. We shall read in 2 weeks, Parshas Vayishlach. His whole storyline, his whole genealogy is a litany of illegitimacy. There's no way to say that Isaac, one of the 3 founders of our people, there's no way to think that he intended to assign Esau as his heir. Isaac certainly knew that Jacob was the true heir. And in fact, if you read the Parsha very carefully, you will notice that at the end of the Parsha, when Rebekah and Isaac send Jacob away, Isaac gives Jacob a second blessing. And this time doesn't mention anything about crops or wine or fat of the land. He says, may God give you the blessing of Abraham. When Jacob received the first blessing, the blessing that Isaac thought he was giving to Esau, there's no mention of the blessing of Abraham. Isaac had intended to give one blessing to Esau, but to reserve the even more precious blessing, the blessing of Abraham, the continuity of Abraham, that was always reserved for Jacob. But Isaac and Rebekah had different philosophies for how the Jewish people, meaning the descendants of Jacob, ought to live. Isaac was a man of judgment. His whole story is judgment. He's never given a single compliment in the Torah because judgment receives judgment. And the judgment of God is harsh and biting and unyielding. Isaac had a philosophy of service of God that's judgment. There's no smiles, there's no happiness, just tough, unremitting judgment. And that's what he envisioned for Jacob as well. Live a life of physical and material privation so you could focus on your spiritual pursuits unencumbered. I'll give all the physical material blessings to Esau. Let him be caught up with all that nonsense so you could focus solely on the matters of the soul. That was Isaac's plan. And Rebekah understood that the nation would need the material wherewithal to facilitate our spiritual agenda. And Rebekah, guided by the prophecy again, the prophecy that was denied to Isaac, she understood that she needed to act upon her prophecy, to actualize it, and she coordinated the heist. Isaac is judgment. He is treated with judgment. The Torah presents him as this like hapless, naive person who's seduced by the barbecue. Who could say no to some nice Texas ribs? Really? That's Isaac? Okay, that's a prophet? Of course not. But that's how the Torah operates with judgment. Judgment gets judgment. He wanted that for Jacob. Let Esau have the whole world, this whole physical world. You could focus on matters of the spirit. Rebekah understood maybe that works for Isaac, not necessarily for Jacob and his descendants. And she took action. This is an important idea, a general idea to remember about the Parsha. Don't make the mistake of thinking that Isaac saw Esau as the heir of Abraham. But more specifically, the blessings. This heist, the greatest heist of all time. Why did the blessings have to come to Jacob through this labyrinthine mess? Rebekah has the prophecies. She doesn't share it. Isaac favors Esau, wants to give the blessings to Esau. And the only way to avoid that is via the heist. Why such an unconventional, convoluted way for this part of our history to be delivered? This question was asked by the very ancient sources. And the Zohar says something unbelievable. This blessing cannot have the fingerprints of any human on them. This blessing has to come from God to Jacob via the prophet Isaac, but he cannot have any influence over this. He has to think he's giving it to someone else. He's not even thinking about Jacob. It's coming directly, a funnel from God to Jacob, and Isaac has no influence on that. That's what the Zohar says. The reason why this whole story has to happen is so the blessing that Jacob deserves and he needs to get, it comes from God and not from any human. Now, why is that important? So the commentaries expand and they say, this blessing, it's going to endure for all time. And it's going to be a critical element of the perpetuation and the continuity and the vitality of the nation. This blessing must have godly perfection. Isaac, he's one of the greats, but he's still a human. It cannot be tainted by any human. That's, again, an interesting idea based upon the Zohar. And there's another, I guess, tweak of how you could say this. There's a famous essay by the Maharal where he talks about the nation and the bedrock and the foundation of the nation. Nothing that happens to the nation on a national level can be by chance. It can't be that there's any coincidences on a national level. And the canonical example of this is Moshe. Moshe is going to save the Jewish people, right? Well, where does he come from? So we know his father's Amram, a Levite. His mother's Yocheved, also a Levite. But when you read his story, chapter 2 of Exodus, it doesn't identify his parents. Chapter 2 of Exodus, verse 1, there was a Levite man who met a Levite woman. Their identities are omitted. And they have a son. Of course, that's Moshe. He ends up in Pharaoh's home, as we know, and through a long series and chain of events ends up saving the Jewish people, leading the Exodus from Egypt. Why doesn't the Torah say Amram, a Levite, marries Yocheved, a Levite? Why does it obscure the identity of Moshe's parents? Says the Maharal. If you learned about Moshe's parents and the righteous Amram married the righteous Yocheved, You say, well, he was such a righteous father and such a noble and righteous and pious mother. Of course they're going to have a son like Moshe. It's only natural that the product of such pedigree will be someone like Moshe. But no, can't be like that. This is the handiwork of God. And thus, the human contributors to the story, their role is going to be deprecated. It's going to be reduced. Don't make the mistake of thinking that this nation is being guided by humans. No. It's being guided by God. Similarly, this blessing, this is something which is of national importance for us. It's part of our national makeup. It can't be that it's a matter of chance that Isaac, he knows Jacob is so righteous. I'm going to give him the blessing. No, there's no human oversight to this nation. So God keeps Isaac out of the loop. He obscures from Isaac that it's appropriate to bless Jacob. And yes, Jacob was blessed by Isaac, but not because of what Isaac wanted. He wanted something very different. You think about, later on in Genesis, we read about Joseph going to Egypt. How many different elements of the story to contribute to Joseph ending up in Egypt. He goes to Egypt. He's hated by his brothers. He's sold as a slave. He's imprisoned in Egypt. He has the royal cellmate. He interprets their dreams. Pharaoh has a dream. And before you know it, Joseph is he's the viceroy of Egypt. And then there's the famine, and he toys and plays and teases the sons of Jacob that come to visit, and so on. The most improbable, implausible series of events happened to our nation at its founding to teach us, at least from a national perspective, God is totally in charge. He has a plan. Don't fret over it. There's no way that you could possibly conceive the ways of God when it comes to managing, overseeing, directing this nation. I was thinking this is a very useful thought for us to have. There's a lot of things happening in the world to our people. And just tonight we're told that there was a ceasefire in Lebanon. Well, all's well, at least all's well on the northern front, right? But what's going to be with Iran? And what's to be with the International Criminal Court? They are arresting the Israeli leaders. And what's going to be with Europe? And is there going to be an apocalypse? And what about the nuclear weapons? And how's Messiah going to come? Well, Russia and Ukraine and Taiwan and the United States, will they lose their reserve currency? I have a tendency to think about these questions. The Americans, they're going to pull the weaponry from Israel, and Israel will be isolated. And what's going to be? What's going to happen to our people, to our land? Humans have no say in this. Not Isaac, not Rebecca, nobody, not Jacob. Everyone's being compelled to do the will of God. No one would have chosen any of these junctures, so to speak, that came along the process of building this nation. Jacob didn't want to do it. In fact, the Gaon of Vilna says that when Jacob said, maybe my father will feel me and to find out who I am, he actually wanted to be caught. Because it bothered him so much, he'll have to be dishonest. And Rebecca, she's been forced to do it via prophecy. And Isaac, he's totally in the dark. And Joseph in Egypt, every single stage, the humans would have opted to choose a different path. It's a very important, valuable lesson for us, I think, in the confusing times in which we live. I want to share a few more perspectives. I know I'm building up to the crescendo. I got something special for you at the end. I know most of y'all, certainly the ones on the audio, you checked out already, right? That's the tradition after all. Jacob. He has a brother, an arch nemesis. Jacob is triumphing here. Jacob could have highs and lows. We know when Jacob is up and Esau is down. When the voice of Jacob is strong, then the fists of Esau are quieted. Jacob has highs. He has nadirs. This is a high. It's a heist. He's defeating Esau. He's triumphing over his twin. And of course, this portends to all of Jewish history. Jacob's going to outfox and outmaneuver his more mighty adversary. If they had an arm wrestle, okay, you know who would win, right? But Jacob is repeatedly winning. From the Torah's perspective, what merit did Jacob have to win? How does he overcome his brother? So the commentaries focus on this story and the circumstances of this heist. And they point to some very interesting themes. Abraham was tested. We know 10 tests, and he triumphed in all of them. This is a test. This is Jacob's, so to speak, binding of Isaac episode. If you think about it, Abraham, his central quality is kindness. He's the one who has the door open for everyone. We see how he has a frenzy of kindness towards the 3 travelers. And God says, okay, your kindness, great. Your benevolence and hospitality, great. Take your son and offer him as a sacrifice. That's a total violation of everything that Abraham stood for and tried to teach the world about. The ultimate test is when God commands you to do something wrong. Not only wrong, but uniquely wrong for you. Abraham, you're the king of kindness. Do the most unkind thing in the world. That's a test of the highest order. Jacob is truthful. He's the most honest and truthful person there is. Again, the prophet declares, Emes liYaakov, truth is for Jacob. That is Jacob's defining characteristic. And now he's forced. He's handcuffed. Go impersonate your brother. Say, I am Esau. And again, Rashi explains. He says, who are you? Esau. Your firstborn. Esau is your firstborn. It's like a technical way to avoid lying. It's like, what is the definition of is, right? You heard that, right? It depends on what the definition of is. It could be like a technical way to avoid technically lying. I am who I am. I am, put the comma there. I am, I think, therefore I am. I am. Esau, your firstborn. Oh, okay, you read it like that. Maybe Esau is your firstborn. This is so not Jacob-like. Dress up as your brother, deceive your father. Abraham, the master of kindness, is told, do something unkind. The test for Jacob, the master of truth, is God, the prophet, via Rebekah, is telling you, go act untruthfully. This is a test. And Jacob really wanted to fail the test, just like maybe Abraham would have wanted to fail his test. But he did it. And that's a triumph of ultimate faith in God above everything else. He misrepresents himself. He impersonates someone else. He masquerades as someone else. And by the way, he does it again. Abram has to banish Ishmael. Abram has to bind Isaac. Jacob has to do the same thing. He has to impersonate Esau. And the whole Parsha next week, he has to match up with Laban and his deceptiveness mano a mano. And he has to emerge at the end of it with his integrity and truthfulness unscathed. This is Jacob's binding of Isaac episode, a test. And in the merit of this test, just as Abraham in the merit of his test, our nation will flourish. That's one way the commentaries explain what's happening over here. The only way that Jacob could earn the spiritual merit of this blessing, the blessing that will reverberate throughout all time, it's only if he overcomes that very difficult sort of test. And there's like another way of presenting this. Jacob has an adversary. Esau. And we think of Esau, he's a hunter, he's all red, he lights the barbecue, he's an outdoorsman. He doesn't match up to Jacob spiritually, and that is true. However, there was one area in which Jacob was actually inferior spiritually to Esau. Esau excelled in the mitzvah of honoring your parents. That was the one mitzvah that he surpassed Jacob in. For Jacob to triumph, not just over a test, over the Satan, over the Yetzer Hara like Abraham had to do, to triumph over his brother. He had to neutralize the spiritual power of Esau, and he had to do honoring his parents on a greater level, to a higher degree than his brother does. So he's positioned that his mother tells him to do something that he absolutely, categorically doesn't want to do. He'd rather lose everything than to say even something which remotely resembles an untruth. But his mother tells him to do it. And she comes with the power of prophecy behind her. This was the ultimate act of honoring his parents. You want to defeat Esau, you have to have some ammunition that can outflank Esau. He has the merit of honoring his father. The only way you can possibly triumph over him is with coming with some merit of equal or greater power, honoring your mother. And that's why it was set up like this. It's the only way it could have happened. And I want to end off with another fascinating perspective. I get this question all the time. The whole story, we all read it, and we're trained to, we can read. We don't necessarily read all the commentary. We read such a bothersome story. It's a troubling story. It's a story that seems morally unjust. And the commentaries, they open up these different realms of understanding for us. I'm going to end off with one more. Jacob and Esau are opposites, different worlds. And this conflict, this cosmic conflict, is already in utero. They're battling at it. They're just not compatible from the very beginning of their relationship. And they're tussling, and they're sparring, and they're jostling from the very beginning. And Rebecca, she's bothered by it, and she goes to the prophet, and the prophet tells her there's two nations within you and two peoples, and they'll have a very curious property. When one is up, the other is down. When the other one gets up, the other one must go down. Jacob and Esau, like their fortunes, their destinies, are linked in an inverse way. There's a zero-sum quality to this relationship. When one is up, the other must be down. When the other one is up, well, then the first one must be down. Has to be like that. That's part of the prophecy. That's the reality of these two brothers. I will add parenthetically, there are some sources that say that, well, maybe Esau in the future can have some sort of reclamation and can ultimately fulfill maybe the legacy of Esau. That's a separate point. We might have spoken about that in the past. That maybe there was some way for them to coexist. Didn't work out, at least not the first go around. Now this idea Rashi cites, it's expanded upon in the Talmud. The Talmud looks not at Jacob and Esau as individuals, but at Jerusalem, the bastion of Jacob, and Caesarea. That's the home, the epicenter of Esau. Talmud says, if you hear in the news, oh, the cities of Jerusalem and Caesarea were both destroyed, don't believe the news. Fake news. It can't be that these two cities will fall at the same time. Similarly, if you hear in the news, Caesarea and Jerusalem are both flourishing, don't believe it. More fake news. Cannot be. If you hear Caesarea was destroyed, Jerusalem is flourishing, Jerusalem was destroyed. Caesarea is flourishing. Those two could be believable. That you should believe. Because Jacob and Esau, Jerusalem and Caesarea, they are opposites. When one's up, the other's down, and vice versa. Quotes the verse, Ulaom milaom yamatz. One nation will always be on top of the other. There's a fascinating characteristic in this relationship. Jacob and Esau, they're opposites. But they can't get rid of each other. They're twins. They're inextricably linked. Their fates are intertwined. When one rises, the other falls. When Esau rises, necessarily Jacob falls. When Jacob rises, necessarily Esau falls. Their fortunes seesaw. They cannot both flourish simultaneously. If the voice of Jacob dominates, the Talmud tells us, then the hands of Esau, of Esau are tied. If Jacob's voice of Torah reverberates resoundingly in the academy, well, then the hands of Esau, the violent hands of Esau, are quieted. If the voice of Jacob ceases, if Jerusalem is destroyed, well, then Esau's hands are awakened. Jacob must soar in our Parsha. Jerusalem must rise. That must be paired with the fall of Rome, with the fall of Caesarea, with the fall of Esau. The only way Jacob can merit this blessing, if Isaac says, listen, Jacob, I got a blessing for you, and Esau's not involved, there's no way for Jacob to soar unless Esau is depressed. Unless he's stiffed. Unless Caesarea is in rubble, only then can Jerusalem rise and soar. The blessings to Jacob can only come in this way. The only way for Jacob to be blessed is if Esau loses tremendously. It's a package deal. The rise of Jacob must be accompanied with the fall of Esau. And to me, this is an absolutely fascinating idea. Our sages tell us that Jacob and Esau, they represent two qualities that we all have within us. There was a war within Rebekah, there's a war within us. We have an Esau and a Jacob operating within us. The Yetzer Tov, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, the good inclination. And we want to win. If you're serious about life and you realize the consequences and the ramifications of this battle, you want to find a way that your Jacob can defeat your Esau. And we have a whole Parsha of how to do it. And really the whole storyline, the whole through line of Jacob and Esau is each part of it is instructive to us if we want to do the same in our internal battle, in that jostling, that sparring that happens within us, as it happened within Rebekah. And maybe we could say that there's two ways to win. It's really one way, but there's two battlefronts. You want to pump up Jacob and you want to push down Esau. You want to advance with Jacob or diminish Esau. Those will always go together. When one force is augmented, the other necessarily shrinks. I have to tell you, I read this week an essay, a phenomenal essay that my grandfather, blessed memory, wrote in the 1960s. It's a pretty old essay. Now, he's written so much and he's published so much, but there's more of his writings that are still in manuscript form than have been published. And I know a guy who knows a guy. I have access to the manuscripts. So I was perusing some of the manuscripts, millions and millions of words. I was looking for something specific, and sometimes you open up the document, you search for some term, and I start just reading around some of the essays that are there. We have most of it typed up already. So I encountered an essay titled Heaven and Earth in the Soul. Shamayim va'aretz b'nefesh. And it's a masterful essay. And I don't want to give you the whole essay. I don't want to spoil it for you. No, I don't know if you'll read it. Probably won't read it. It's in Hebrew and it's not published. But the context of the essay is, he starts off by citing some citations that say that all of our behavior is dominated by pursuit of pleasure, by pursuit of honor, by pursuit of lust. How do we awaken the soul? That's kind of the lead of the piece. But he offers a phenomenal analogy. Day and night is heaven and earth. And he says, this is the analogy. What happens by daytime? Where is our focus? Is it in the heavens or is it in the earth? We can't even look at the heavens. The sun is so bright and it places a spotlight on the earth. That's what we do. By day, the sun just illuminates the whole world. And our focus is on our life over here. We don't think about the galaxies and the heavens and the stars. It's all invisible to us by day. But then the sun sets and darkness blankets the earth. And suddenly the stars begin to twinkle. They emerge. And the focus can be turned to heaven. Here's this great line. If not for darkness, if not for nighttime, we wouldn't know of the existence of the stars. We think of nighttime, it's depressing, it's dark. But we wouldn't know if there was never nighttime. We would not know that stars even exist. They would just totally be outshone by the sun. So by day, our focus is here. It's on earth. And by night, we can focus our attention heavenwardly. This is the analogy. And of course, as we know, humanity, we're like a mini world, our sages tell us. If there's heaven and earth, if there's day and night, if there's the time for the stars to brighten in the sky, and there are times where the stars are hidden, if that's true in the earth, in the big world, it's true in the mini world. Within man, there's also heaven and earth. There's the life of earth, the life of the body, the life of the physical. And there's the life of the heaven, the life of the soul. He doesn't say this, but I'll say it. Scripture tells us, Bilam, in his blessing to the nation, he talks about a star burst forth from Jacob. Jacob's that star. You need to quiet. You need to darken something to see those stars. How do we unlock the heaven, those stars of the soul? How do we turn our attention towards the heaven? The only way to do that is by darkening, so to speak, the focus on earth. Only when it's dark here can you see the stars in heaven. If we want to open up our world to Jacob, to the stars, so to speak, we have to create the conditions for heavenly life. We have to darken the physical world. There's a way to unlock the world of Jacob, the Jacob within, simply by darkening, by deprecating the world of Esau. The power, the richness, the glorious starlight of the soul. You need to have some darkness. You have to remove, so to speak, some of the intense focus on physicality. How will Jacob shine? How will that star burst forth from Jacob, as Scripture tells us? It's only if the Esavian light, the light of the physical realm, is somewhat diminished. Now, in the essay, my grandfather argues that, says, which is very interesting to me, that's really the goal of prayer. I would not have made that connection. But in the essay, he says that when you pray, you're switching off a little bit that bright light that illuminates the world, the physical world. You're talking to God. You're opening up your heart to your Creator. And you're quieting all the nonsense, all the distractions, all the tentacles of Esau that usually clutch us, that usually inhibit us. You're clearing the mind from the distractions, and the darkness, so to speak, that creates can expose those beautiful stars of the soul of Jacob. To me, this is a fabulous insight for how to live a more elevated life. Jacob and Esau, they're opposites. And these two brothers, they're always at odds. When one rises, the other necessarily must fall. Darkness and night. And it's a little confusing because we think of darkness as a bad thing. But stars and a focus on this world, they cannot coexist. The world where we can see beyond our physical purview. The world we can see the stars. The world that we can see above ourselves. The world of Jacob. It demands quieting, a darkening of the world of Esau. Only then the star of Jacob shines forth. There's all sorts of dilemmas in our Parsha. Rebecca, should she share the prophecy with Isaac or not? Should she take action upon the prophecy when she sees that Isaac wants to bless Esau? And she compels, or she encourages, she nudges Jacob to do what he doesn't want to do, to steal the blessings, to deceive Isaac, to raise the wrath of Esau. All sorts of naughty situations in our Parsha, and it's all orchestrated by God, because this is the way it had to be. Only through this very strange and very unexpected and seemingly wrong constellation of circumstances, only when Esau thinks he's about to have the blessing and he is reduced and humiliated and lowered, Caesarea is destroyed, Rome is in shambles. The Yetzer Hara, the focus, the spotlight on the world is turned off. Only then the stars come out, and our people and our soul, Jacob, can achieve his destiny. I appreciate your attention. This was the 4th installment of the Parsha Podcast Live. I'm sitting in the new Torch Center in Houston, Texas. It's not fully finished. We don't have doors yet. We have door frames, but not quite doors. Hopefully we'll get that. Is it too much to ask? That's okay. I'm in the new studio here in the new Torch Center in Houston, Texas. This was the Parsha Podcast. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. I want to hear your questions, your comments, your feedback. If you're not subscribed to the newsletter, you could send me an email. Also, in the description of every podcast, there's a link to subscribe. You could also unsubscribe. It'd be very helpful for me, as I mentioned at the top. Please. So maybe I could stop doing it. I don't want to feel compelled to do it. I did it for 4 weeks. I'm happy. We got some momentum. Hopefully we'll continue. Have a wonderful rest of your day. A sensational, terrific, invigorating rest of your week. And please God, the most idyllic, the most exciting, the most productive and meaningful Shabbos upcoming. It's Parsha's Toldos. 38 years ago, there was a guy who was born on Shabbos, Parsha's Toldos, and now he jabbers on the podcast. So it's an exciting week for us as well. And please God, with help, we'll talk again next week. And again, the email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.